There are places people dream of moving to. Warm cities, coastal towns, busy streets filled with opportunity. And then, there are places people avoid. This was one of them. For most of the year, the town sat buried under snow. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Winds cut through the streets like blades. Cars struggled to start in the mornings. Pipes froze. Roads disappeared beneath layers of ice. Winter didn't just visit this town. It stayed. For nearly 8 months every year, the town existed in extreme cold. The kind of cold that made people leave. And over time, that's exactly what happened. Families moved away. Businesses shut down. Homes were abandoned. The town slowly emptied. At its peak, it had been a small but stable community, built around a few industries that managed to survive in harsh conditions. A mining operation, a small logistics depot, a handful of local services. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to keep the town alive. Until it wasn't. The mine eventually shut down. The logistics company relocated to a more accessible region. And without jobs, the town lost its reason to exist. Within a decade, nearly half the population had disappeared. Shops closed one by one. The school reduced its classes. Entire streets went dark at night. People who passed through described it the same way. Too cold, and nothing there. By the time winter arrived each year, the town felt almost frozen in time. Most people believed the story was simple. This place had no future. Because in a world full of better options, why would anyone choose the coldest town? But while most people saw a place to avoid, one person saw something different. His name was Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole was 34 years old, a financial analyst who had spent most of his career studying patterns most people never noticed. Markets, trends, shifts in global demand. He wasn't interested in what people believed. He was interested in what was changing. And one thing had caught his attention: data. Across the world, something unusual was happening. Companies were building more data centers than ever before. Massive facilities designed to store and process information. Streaming platforms, cloud services, artificial intelligence systems. All of it required enormous amounts of computing power. And more importantly, enormous amounts of cooling. Keeping servers from overheating had become one of the biggest challenges in the industry. Cooling systems consumed huge amounts of energy, and energy costs were rising. For most companies, cooling was an expense. But in one type of location, cooling could be free. Naturally cold environments. Places where temperatures stayed low for most of the year. Places like this town. At first, it sounded too simple. Why build expensive cooling systems when the climate could do it for you? Ethan started researching. He looked at land prices. Extremely low. He studied energy availability. Stable, but underused. He examined infrastructure. Basic, but expandable. And then he saw something even more important. Space. Large amounts of empty land. Cheap land. The kind of land that tech companies in major cities could never afford. The more Ethan studied the town, the more it stopped looking like a problem and started looking like an opportunity. But there was one issue. No one else had noticed. Because no one was looking. The town's reputation had already been decided. Too cold. Too remote. Not worth it. But Ethan understood something most people ignored. Sometimes, the biggest opportunities exist in the places everyone has already rejected. So he did something unexpected. He booked a flight, then drove the final hours through snow-covered roads into the town. When he arrived, it looked exactly as people described. Quiet. Frozen. Almost forgotten. The wind howled between empty buildings. Snow-covered sidewalks that no one had walked in days. A single diner still open near the main road. And beyond it, endless cold. To most people, it confirmed everything. This place had no future. But Ethan didn't come to confirm the past. He came to test an idea. Standing in the middle of the town, surrounded by silence and snow, he imagined something completely different. Rows of data centers. Servers running day and night. Heat being pulled away naturally by the freezing air. Companies saving millions in cooling costs. And suddenly, money flowing into a place no one wanted. It sounded impossible, but the numbers told a different story. If even one company took the risk, everything could change. The question wasn't whether the idea made sense. The question was, could he convince anyone else? Because what Ethan Cole was about to attempt had never been done in a place like this before. And if he failed, the coldest town would remain exactly what it had always been. Forgotten. When Ethan Cole returned from the town, he didn't talk about the snow. He didn't talk about the empty streets. He didn't talk about the cold. He talked about numbers. Because numbers didn't care about reputation. They only cared about efficiency. And the numbers told a very different story. In most major cities, data centers spent millions every year just to keep their systems from overheating. Cooling systems ran constantly. Electricity bills were massive. Infrastructure costs were rising. And as demand for computing power increased, those costs were only getting worse. But in the town Ethan had just visited, cooling wasn't a problem. It was an advantage. For nearly 8 months of the year, the outside temperature alone could cool entire server facilities. No expensive systems. No excessive energy consumption. Just air. Cold, constant, and free. Ethan began building a proposal. Not for investors at first, but for himself. He mapped out cost comparisons between traditional data centers and cold climate operations. He calculated energy savings, land acquisition costs, construction expenses, logistics. At first, it looked like a niche idea, something small, experimental. But as he refined the model, something surprising happened. The margins improved dramatically. What began as a theory started looking like a competitive advantage. Ethan knew one thing. If he could prove this model worked, it wouldn't stay small for long. So he made his first real move. He reached out to mid-sized tech companies. Not the largest corporations. They were too slow, too cautious, too invested in existing infrastructure. Instead, he targeted companies that were growing fast. Cloud startups, data storage firms, AI processing companies, businesses that needed computing power and needed it quickly. Most of them ignored him. Some responded politely, but declined. And a few were more direct. Why would we build in a place no one wants to live? It was the same obstacle again and again. The town's reputation. Cold meant uncomfortable. Remote meant inconvenient. And inconvenient meant risky. Ethan realized something important. He wasn't just selling a business idea. He was trying to change perception. So he changed his approach. Instead of pitching the town, he pitched the advantage. Lower operating costs. Scalable land. Natural cooling. He showed them something simple. A comparison. 2 data centers. One in a major city. One in the coldest town. Same size. Same capacity. Completely different costs. And for the first time, people started paying attention. One company in particular stood out. A growing cloud storage firm struggling with rising infrastructure costs. They needed expansion, but traditional options were becoming too expensive. When Ethan presented his model, they didn't reject it. They asked questions. A lot of them. About infrastructure. About workforce availability. About reliability in extreme weather. Ethan had anticipated every concern. He proposed phased development. Start small. Build a pilot facility. Test the model. If it worked, expand. The company didn't say yes, but they didn't say no either. They agreed to visit the town. And that was the moment everything started to shift. When the executives arrived, the first thing they noticed was exactly what everyone else noticed. The cold. The silence. The emptiness. It didn't look like a place where technology companies built infrastructure. It looked like a place people had left behind. But Ethan didn't show them the town. He showed them the opportunity. He walked them through potential sites. Large empty plots of land. Former industrial areas. Spaces that could be developed quickly. He explained how server facilities could be designed to pull in outside air for cooling. How energy usage could be reduced. How costs could drop significantly compared to urban environments. Then he showed them the numbers again. This time, standing in the place where it could actually happen. And something changed. For the first time, they didn't see a frozen town. They saw a cost advantage. A few weeks later, the decision came. They would build the first data center. Not a massive one. Not yet. A pilot project. But it was enough. Construction began in the middle of winter. Heavy equipment moved through snow-covered land. Steel structures rose against the frozen landscape. For the first time in years, the town saw something it hadn't seen in a long time. Activity. At first, the locals didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it was temporary. Others didn't understand what was being built. A building with no windows. Filled with machines. No traditional jobs like the old industries. It didn't look like a typical factory. But slowly, the impact began to show. Construction crews stayed longer. Local services saw small increases in business. Supplies were ordered. Equipment was delivered. And then, the building was completed. The first data center powered on. Inside, rows of servers began running continuously. Outside, the freezing air did something remarkable. It cooled the entire system. Naturally. Efficiently. Exactly as Ethan had predicted. The results came faster than expected. Operating costs were lower. Cooling efficiency was higher. System performance was stable. The experiment worked. And in the world of business, success doesn't stay quiet for long. Within months, other companies began asking questions. How was it working? What were the costs? Could the model scale? Ethan now had something he didn't have before. Proof. And proof changed everything. The same idea that once sounded impossible now looked inevitable. Because if one company could save money there, others would follow. And as the second company arrived, then the third, something began happening that no one had predicted. The coldest town was starting to warm up, not in temperature, but in opportunity. Lights began staying on longer at night. More vehicles appeared on the roads. Small businesses started reopening. And the town that had once been defined by what it lost was beginning to be defined by what it was becoming. But this was only the beginning. Because what happened next would bring more money into the town than anyone had imagined. And it would turn the cold into one of the most valuable assets in the entire region. The second company didn't arrive quietly. By the time they made their decision, word had already begun spreading. Not publicly, not in headlines, but inside the industry. Data centers, cooling efficiency, unexpected location, lower costs. The kind of information that moves fast between companies competing for advantage. What started as an experiment was becoming a pattern. The second facility was larger. More servers, more infrastructure, more investment. And unlike the first, this one didn't feel temporary. It felt intentional. Construction moved faster this time. Crews already understood the environment. Engineers refined the design. The town had learned something important from the first project. This wasn't a one-time event. This was the beginning of something repeatable. And as the second data center came online, the results confirmed it. Lower operating costs, higher efficiency, scalable performance. The model worked. Again, that's when everything changed. Because in industries driven by numbers, success attracts attention. Major companies began studying the location. Executives who would have dismissed the idea months earlier were now asking a different question. How quickly can we build there? The town that had been ignored for years suddenly had something rare. Demand. By the third year, multiple companies had secured land. Construction permits increased. New infrastructure plans were approved. The town that once struggled to maintain basic services was now preparing for expansion. Roads were upgraded. Power systems expanded. Internet connectivity improved dramatically. Fiber lines were installed. The transformation wasn't just visible. It was structural. The economy wasn't recovering. It was evolving. And with that evolution came something even more important. Jobs. Not the same kind of jobs the town had before. No underground shifts. No heavy extraction work. But new roles. Technicians. Engineers. IT specialists. Maintenance crews. Security staff. And for the first time in years, the town faced a different problem. Not a lack of opportunity, but a shortage of people. Workers started moving in. Some from nearby regions. Others from completely different states. Young professionals who would have never considered this town before. Now choosing it. Because where there are jobs, people follow. Homes that had been abandoned were renovated. New housing developments began appearing on the outskirts of town. The school expanded again. Restaurants reopened. Cafes appeared where there had once been empty buildings. And the most surprising change was the atmosphere. The silence was gone. In its place, a steady hum. Not of machines underground, but of servers. Constant. Invisible. Running day and night. Processing data for companies across the world. The town that once depended on a single industry now powered something far larger. Information. And as more facilities were built, something unexpected happened. The cold itself became valuable. Not just useful. Not just convenient. Valuable. Companies began competing for land. Early investors saw property values rise. Local businesses adapted to serve a growing population. The town that had once been considered too remote was now strategically positioned. Because in a digital world, location means something different. You don't need to be close to people. You need to be efficient. And this town was exactly that. By the fifth year, the transformation was undeniable. What had once been a nearly abandoned place was now one of the fastest growing data infrastructure hubs in the region. Billions of dollars in computing power operated within its boundaries. Money flowed into the town, not slowly, but continuously, through construction, through operations, through expansion, and through something else. Confidence. Because once a place proves it works, others stop questioning it. They start following it. Ethan Cole never described himself as someone who changed the town. He described himself as someone who noticed something others ignored. The cold wasn't the problem. It was the advantage. The town wasn't empty. It was available. And the biggest difference between failure and opportunity was perspective. Today, if you visit the town in winter, it still looks the same at first. Snow covering the ground, cold air cutting through the streets, frost forming on windows. But look closer. You'll see something different. Large, modern facilities standing where nothing once existed. Lights on inside buildings at all hours. Data moving through systems that never sleep. People walking through streets that were once empty. The cold didn't disappear. It became the reason everything returned. Because sometimes, the very thing that makes a place difficult is the same thing that makes it valuable. And in this town, the cold didn't drive people away anymore. It brought everything back.